I am on the clock in 13 slow drafts right now. You know the drill by now. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. What is up? Welcome in. I am a little bit under the weather. Nothing serious. Very, very minor. Excited to be here. We got a few more GMs. We got a few more drafts to do, a few more picks to make in these builds that you guys have been following along with. I wanted to, make sure that I finish these up. I got some comments that were like, this is fun to see how these teams play out over the different drafts. It's the slow draft setup. I have to keep coming back every few days to finish the drafts. Our buddy Sean Stutzman, again, for the Go Bills team, he's been hanging out in the chat a little bit. He forced me to draft Najee Harris. He wants to be very clear that he's not actually drafting that much Najee Harris. He says, I'm just here to say how much I love Najee Harris. And if you look at my exposures, you should totally ignore the 30% number next to some guy called Warren Fake News. Must have caught the last couple streams after the fact because I mentioned a couple times that it was all Sean's fault that I drafted Najee Harris. Glad to have you back, Sean. None of us actually wants to draft Najee Harris, but he is a reasonable pick at cost this year. So we are taking some. Good question here from T. Peter right away. Says, I know you can't do fast, but I do. But do you feel like slow draft rooms are sharper than fast? I mean, it's interesting. There's some different stuff. Let's ask to answer this question. I'm going to jump in to my drafts and grab one that I changed the name of to Stack Jack because I did what I thought I kind of needed to do because I oftentimes get a little bit too interested in getting my what view is best for you guys? Probably me on the side here. I think I've been on the bottom, but then you can't see stuff. I want you guys to be able to see as much as you can and actually be able to read what's on the screen. We'll go here for now. Let me know if you like the other video, the other view. This point I'm making is about the side middle. The chat's saying, all right, I'll go side middle. Let's do that. If you guys can read that. The point I'm making here is entirely about trying to push your quarterback around the turn when you're at the 10 or at the 3 and it's coming back to you and you have two guys beyond you at the turn or one guy if you're at the 2 or the 11 and you need to get a QB for a specific stack. Corain wrote that piece last year about like you stole my stack and thank you. And then he, talked about how he can then try to build out other stacks. There's other answers sometimes, but it's an annoying thing to get your stack jacked, to get your QB stolen. By way of this question of what's sharper, I think it's interesting that slow draft rooms, you definitely have more time to think and you get, I think, less fallers for sure. You get some of these situations where people will do some different stuff. So I did what I thought I should do and tried to send a quarterback around the turn because that's what we do all the time on like ship chasing. Pat and Pete are guys that have way better feel for that kind of thing than me. And especially Peter Overzet is just incredible. He's like, this guy's going to come back to us. And he always does. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to risk that, but it always works out. I've learned to just absolutely, like a year plus ago, learn to just trust this dude. If he says that, I'm like, I feel fully confident in it. I myself in my own drafts don't have as strong of a feel for that. And at times last year, when I started doing my slows, and I did about 100 last year to start. For those who don't know my whole backstory, I live in a state where I can't do fast drafts. And I didn't know that I could just travel out of the state and enter drafts until June of last year And I immediately took a trip down to Oregon and started entering a bunch of slow drafts. It was a blast. Because on some of the sites, it doesn't matter where you physically are. If you're a resident, if your home address is in a banned state, they won't take your money. Underdog's a little different. It's about where you are. It's like going to Vegas. I'm not allowed. I'm able to go to Vegas and gamble, obviously, right? But I'm not able to in Washington. Anyway, my home residency doesn't matter. Anyway, I don't know all the laws or whatever, but I'm just kind of explaining what I've understood through the history of fantasy football and whether, what I was able to do and not do. I started doing these slows last year, and while I was doing them, I would get so annoyed by not being able to push quarterbacks around turns, it felt like, as much as it always seemed to work out on chip chasing. And I actually got to talking to Sean Siegel about this a little bit as it relates to this particular draft. And he kind of theorized, and I kind of buy into it, that it probably is harder to get that kind of thing to pass around to you in a slow, because at every pick then somebody's sort of hyper analyzing whether they can do something with that QB value. Maybe they can backstack that player. And so, in a fast draft, they don't really have the time. They're like, this is going to mess up my build if I take this player. Now, this one was particularly tilting. I'm in the 10 hole here. I drafted a team that I am just going to go full screen on this so you guys can see it a little bit better, maybe. If I push this button, then it pops into a different window. Then I have to share that window. Share this tab instead. Oh, nice. I did it. Okay. A.J. Brown, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Jalen Hurts, Kyle Pitts, Rome Odunze, Rashee Rice, Ramondre Stevenson, Devin Singletary, David Njoku, et cetera, et cetera. This is approaching the 11-12 turn, which is where I had to make this decision. I just read to you my first 10 picks. I have a Kyle Pitts and Njoku at tight end. I have 5 receivers: A.J. Brown, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Rome Odunze, Rashee Rice. I have Jalen Hurts already stacked with Brown, so I didn't worry about QB2 at all. Ramondre Stevenson and Devin Singletary were my only running backs. It's a pretty standard build for me. For those of you who have been watching these streams, if you're paying attention to what the stack is, I had Drake London and Kyle Pitts on this team. So I had starred Kirk Cousins. He's a pretty reasonable value as a drop back passer going a little bit later before the quarterback really falls off. I'd say him and Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford, that little group is sort of the end of this like QB target window. And then it starts to get pretty sketchy where you're like, I don't even know if the guys after that are starting 17 games. And you could say that about Cousins. He's coming off an Achilles. They drafted a top 10 quarterback, but I feel like with the contract he got, he's probably their starter for most of 2024. And then it probably bought him a year and a half if you really dig into the contract. Into 2025 is when we might see Penix, but I'm pretty comfortable playing the Falcons and playing Cousins. And so anyway, I get to on the clock at 1:30 at 11:10. The guy in the 12 hole here has Jared Goff and Josh Allen. He's not going to take Cousins. The guy in the 11 hole has Lamar Jackson. Has him with Derrick Henry. I maybe should have noticed that he had Terry McLaurin and had already taken Brian Robinson. So he had done a couple little Washington things, and maybe he was telling himself, Kirk Cousins is a week 17 correlation there. But he had a premium QB like I did, and I don't think you have to even go in the Cousins range, the 11-12 turn for your QB2, if you take Lamar Jackson, right? You can wait even longer. So I looked at this turn and I go, this is going to turn me into the Joker if Cousins goes, because there's no way he should go. By the way, neither of these teams have any Falcons on them. There's no Bijan over here. I have both London and Pitts, so there's no stacks. Adonai Mitchell was about a 12-pick ADP value, and I don't even like him. But I had 5 receivers at this point. I'm like, I could add some rookie upside. I have to do what makes logical sense for this build. I have to learn the lesson that my buddy Pete Overzet has taught me. I have to try to send this quarterback around the turn. If he doesn't come back to me, I'm never going to do it again. I'm going to overpay for every quarterback in the rest of the world. I'm only going to worry about making my stacks from here on out for the rest of my life. I took Adonai Mitchell, who I did think was sort of the end of a tier in some respects, especially if like Jacoby Myers ends up going at the turn, which he does. You have Brandon Cooks and Gabe Davis both going at the turn. Those 3 receivers go off 1, 2, 3, and then on the way back, the Lamar Jackson drafter with the 2 Washington players, but no Atlanta players, takes Kirk Cousins. He's not going to get Darnell Mooney. He might get Darnell Mooney, I guess, now that I'm looking at it, because only 3 have gone. But Mooney's ADP is right in this range. It doesn't look like Mooney will come back. So his real only play now is to backstack with Rondale Moore late, assuming that Mooney goes. If we go back to let's see. I got to go back to the other tab now. If we go back to my main tab, because I just wanted to share that draft board because I'm so tilted. Darnell Mooney's the second wide receiver by ADP behind only Quentin Johnston. We are already a fraction of a pick behind Mooney's ADP. There are 6 more picks until that guy's up. Maybe Mooney will make it back to him. But I think that's a tough bet. I think if you're going to take Cousins there, you probably should have went Cousins Mooney on that turn as opposed to taking Jacoby Myers and then hitting Cousins on the way back. So anyway, yeah, that's me. The big thing about Cousins is I don't think I have a lot of other stack outs on this build. I have Zay Flowers. I can't take Lamar. I have a Dunze. I can't take Caleb Williams. I have Rashee Rice. I can't take Mahomes. The Mitchell pick came at that decision point. I have David Njoku, so I could, I think, take Deshaun Watson, who I believe I starred after I lost Cousins, and now I'm understanding right now live that Deshaun Watson went 19 picks ahead of ADP and didn't even make it back to me at the 13-14 turn so that I could overdraft him by 10 picks at the 13-14 turn. That was my only other out, was my Njoku. So I don't have any other stack options, and that's probably why I should have broke the tie towards Cousins, locked that up, and dealt with wide receiver on the way back. There's a lot. I mean, I'm not saying that this person screwed me over. Like there's a fun conversation about the idea of getting stolen on your stacks. I think there are a lot of people that are like, this is the dumbest pick ever. I actually think I just got done writing a piece over at Stealing Signals. And by the way, go subscribe to my newsletter, bengretch.substack.com. That's what keeps the lights on. Also subscribe to this YouTube channel, like all the other stuff that you're supposed to do, turn on notifications. I just got done writing a piece called the perfect storm candidates for like the 2024 seasons that are going to be the elite outlier seasons that we're looking for in fantasy. And a lot of them I've talked about on the stream. I've talked about the Falcons a little bit. And as part of talking through the Falcons situation, there's a lot of reasons to love the Falcons situation. They have an incredibly easy schedule. They play in a dome. They have a nice playoff schedule. They, most importantly, are going from an Arthur Smith offense that was bottom 2 in pass rate over expected the last 2 years. Each of the last 2 years independently, they were last year. They were second to last the year prior. And they were actually lower the year prior, but the Bears were absurdly low in 2022. So the point is the Falcons have been incredibly low in their pass rate over the last couple of seasons. And they also have just like rotated their usage of their skill players in an annoying way. We've often talked about that with Arthur Smith. They're now also the little underrated thing, getting a Rams offense probably with Zach Robinson coming over. He spent the last 5 years on staff underneath Sean McVay. He's been the passing game coordinator for the Rams for the last 2 years. The Rams love to run 11 heavy personnel, and their usage is like not even just for the running backs, which I've talked about with like Kyron Williams and stuff, but their wide receivers run routes on 100% of dropbacks, which like frequently, which is crazy. Every single dropback, and like quite a bit. And the Falcons didn't do that last year. Even Drake London, was pretty heavily used, but he'd be at like 92%, 88%. Kyle Pitts had a bunch of games in the 60s in terms of, routes per dropback. A little bit different for a tight end, but there's this potential for a lot more concentration of routes and snaps in Atlanta. So it's this perfect storm situation. I love the Falcons. I don't even hate that this person's like, okay, I'm going to take him. And I think that they're like, maybe Mooney comes back to me, or I'll take Rondale Moore. I think they're going to run a ton of 11 personnel. And I think those guys are viable late round wide receivers because I think they're going to run a ton of routes. So I can backstack Cousins. Whatever. It's his prerogative. It's his team. He does have some Washington players. I get it. I'm not that. It's like, whatever. But it does, so I'm not saying he's an idiot. I don't think we always understand what other people might be planning. as they think through their builds. There will be situations probably where I'll look at a team and be like, this doesn't make any sense. This person is an idiot. But in this case, it's not immediately clear to me that there's something wrong with him making this pick, other than the fact that it just does seem like a lot of capital when you already have Lamar and you don't have either London or Pitts. And it's just like, I didn't anticipate it from that regard. Anyway, that's my 15-minute soliloquy about why you're going to see me take my quarterback from my stack before even considering falling values at other positions. I have been broken. This is my Joker moment. I took Nick Chubb coming back at 135, to be fair. But I took Nick Chubb coming back. I almost took Jerome Ford, but I was like, I don't know how I could take Ford over Chubb. And I did this and then starred Deshaun Watson and said, I'll build out the Cleveland thing with Njoku. And then, Watson didn't make it back either. We'll figure out QB2 on this team later. But, yeah, that's where we stand on that team. I wanted to explain that one. It was kind of a fun one. Still got some guys coming in. Our buddy Tyler's in here. Hi, Ben. Who are we excited to hope fell to us today? Probably those RBs that I talked about last show. Marshawn Lloyd, Kendre Miller, those guys at the 145 ADPs. I think we'll be taking them a few times today. Benjamin Mesa is going to be in Seattle this weekend. What is a cocktail bar of choice? Oh, man. I mean, I used to just cocktail bar is not really my thing. There's a lot of good breweries in Ballard. There's some decent stuff in Lower Queen Anne, like below the Space Needle, which is not actually like downtown. The downtown area would be called like Belltown area. Probably, for me, as far as where I spent the most time in bars, it was like the University District when I was in college, but it's not really, depends on your age group. If you're younger, the Ave by the University is another fun area to find some bars. You can just pop into many of them. I don't know which ones are still standing over there. I used to go to Earl's. It was a dive bar. Fantastic place. Ballard Stoop is a great brewery. Downtown Queen Anne, there's a bar that has karaoke in one room. Aussies would be my Lower Queen Anne preference, but a lot of good spots. Don't think people have jobs. I know, man. I love having you guys here, though. This is my job, so I appreciate you. Appreciate you guys joining every time. This says, I think Leone's manifesto suggested the answer is yes, but minimally so. I saw that comment when it came in. I didn't know what it was in reference to. Maybe it was about me talking about trying to pass the stacks around or get value on the stacks or something. On the topic of Najee, why is Singletary going 20-plus picks behind it? Both bad offenses. Najee has actual backfield competition. People feel relatively similar about them as talents. I think it's that last comment. I don't think people necessarily do feel relatively similar about them. I think Singletary took a long time to even get to where he is now, where people think that he could be a lead back for a whole year. People didn't really like him in Buffalo. They certainly didn't want to draft him last year when he was the backup in Houston. I got a lot of really cheap shares of him as the backup to Dameon Pierce last year. It's a nice little hit. I wasn't like super into him, but he was too cheap. Najee's obviously a former first rounder, and I think people buy into him still having some upside. He actually had a better year last year than he's had in other seasons. Like I was pretty confident Najee sucked, but now we are at the point where everyone kind of thinks that his price has gotten way, way cheaper, and he actually showed a little bit last year in a vaguely decent way. So I'm actually fine with Najee's price, and I think Singletary's probably pretty fragile in terms of being a later career, like sort of first time starter. It's one of those ones where it's like it's really hard for us to predict who would take the work, but just because we can't predict who would take the work doesn't mean that person doesn't exist. If Singletary was going, he's the perfect example of a dead zone back of yesteryear. And because people would project him for all the touches, and then he would go in the 5th round, and then he was just a free agent acquisition that looked like the guy most likely to get the touches, but he didn't end up getting them. I actually read my very first Dead Zone article the other day, like a month ago or something. It came across my desk for some reason. It was at CBS back in the day, and in the intro, I'm talking about these specific types of backs that are very fragile, where it's just the projections that are propping them up, but nobody really wants to buy into the starter. But it's mainly because we don't know that there's who's going to take the work. And the example I give is Alex Collins, who that year was a top 100 pick for the Ravens, because he was the guy they brought in and had a good end of the prior year as a veteran and looked like their lead back. And what I wrote was nobody could predict, because I was writing about the year prior, that this undrafted free agent Gus Edwards would get 150 touches. And that's what happened for the Ravens that year. Alex Collins going as a top 100 pick because he projected this certain way. And then Gus Edwards was the player. I don't know. The point I'm making there is I don't know who the Gus Edwards is on this Giants offense that gets 150 touches. And because of that, I feel more safe with Singletary. But that's probably not fair in terms of what Singletary actually is. It's more just that I don't know who's getting those touches. I don't know if it's Eric Gray or Gary Brightwell. We all love Tyrone Tracy, but then he doesn't have this workhorse profile out of college. He's a really great athlete who played some wide receiver first. He's got more of like the Antonio Gibson thing coming out, where it's like, yeah, he was in college in the early parts of his college career. So he was a 6-year college guy, 4 years at Iowa, then 2 at Purdue. And his first 4 years at Iowa, he never carried more than 7 times. He had, he was a receiver. He had a 36 catch season, 14 catches, 15 catches. Even his first year at Purdue, 17 rush attempts, 28 receptions. More of a receiver, did a little bit more rushing. And then last year, 113 carries. He has 146 career rushes, 113 career receptions. So that's a dude that, is hard to predict to get a ton of work. Just making sure I'm not timing out anywhere right now. But that doesn't mean Singletary has a strong projection for a ton of work. Reasonable case. Reasonable case for him to actually get a decent amount of work. Rounds 12 to 20. Do you feel like the best player available is the optimal route, or still try to correlate no matter what? No, I'm less on the correlation side. This is a good question. I think the correlation stuff is important. I always think of it in terms of I will use that to break ties, and I'm more like strict about that in terms of like I'm breaking ties. Like this is a me breaking tie answer. It's not me saying it's a broken tie, but because I'm, not, I guess I tend to have stronger player takes than a lot of analysts. Like both my buddies Pat and Pete will be a little bit more agnostic, which is not wrong. We don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of chaos in a season, and the agnostic thing is probably the sharper thing. But I tend to be pretty strong in my player takes, and as a result, tend to feel like there's a legitimate difference in the way that I see the profile of a couple different players. So I'm not using correlation as a tiebreaker. I'm picking the guy that I like. That's also because I haven't done as many drafts as those guys, though. Like I do think that over time, I just don't think it pops out to me as much. And I do think over time, and especially as my exposures on certain players get high and I don't want to keep taking them every time, I think I'm going to start leaning more into like I see that coming. I already have felt it. But it's not a no matter what, and I don't think it's a correlate no matter what for Pat and Pete either, or anybody who drafts similarly. I think it's it's still like a tiebreaker thing. It's a consideration. It's all about I think it within tiers. It's all about are you within the same tier? Okay, then correlation's a boost. It's a benefit. It's something you should be considering in the later rounds. So a little bit of both, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B there. I need to just catch up a little bit. Everybody's answering that question of what they do. We got Tyler saying, "What's your job?" He's a touche salesman. He runs a bar, so he kind of does what he wants. He said somebody else saying he's off today, supposed to be doing house chores. You guys, you're making the viewers feel bad. Like I'm skimping on house chores right now. But this is all fantastic stuff. Sean said this is what while we were talking about Cousins, he had the Washington guys he was correlating. I don't think a drop back passer is a correlation answer, I guess. Let's see what else we have. You have to take Mooney for revenge if he makes it to you. I considered it. I don't really care though. Like, I don't care about that guy's team. And I already have the Pitts and London bets, so Mooney doesn't make sense for my build. I'm betting on that offense being pretty concentrated on those other two guys. I do get that, like, yeah, I could be making an overall bet on the offense, and it doesn't have to have Cousins. It could be Penix. But when I take the top two receivers, I don't necessarily want to just throw in a round 13 receiver in addition from that same offense. I feel like, London and Pitts are going to be the main dudes. So I don't know. Maybe I will if it really sets a certain way. Sean mentioning I still have a Watson setup. I'm behind on the chat by quite a bit. But yeah, I got that sniped as well. You guys are, Tyler's pointing out that I was tilt processing in real time. That is absolutely the case. Meatwad's got faith in me. He says he'll get out of this. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how I get out of it. Oh, am I too zoomed in? I'm seeing this comment now. It's a while back. I think I did zoom back out since then. Apologies for that. Yeah, man, I'm just gonna skip. Like, there's you guys. I try to keep up with all the comments like while I'm going because I'm just hanging out with you guys. But you guys got a lot of comments in here. I'm just gonna skip way ahead. Let's start making some other picks. Or we haven't made any picks. Let's make a pick. The puppy is 1 hour away. BBM Schultz in 10. I did get Schultz in 10. Spoiler alert. Oh, I got to the same spot a little bit later. Kirk Cousins in 11 on a team that had Cousins kind of starred. It doesn't have both London and Pitts. This is just a Pitts team, but I went and took Cousins at 11. I was like, screw this. I'm not letting Ash Vegas take Kirk Cousins from me. Cole Kmet I had cover with Hawkinson on Kmet, and I have Caleb Williams, so he was the tight end 2 option for this team. Sort of a no-brainer pick there. After taking Cousins, I started Rondell Moore and Darnell Mooney. I still have a potential Rodgers thing if I wanted to do 3 QBs because it is a Garrett Wilson. But right now, this particular team we just jumped into, I just took Kmet. It was a Caleb Williams, Kirk Cousins with Jahmyr Gibbs, Ramondre Stevenson, and Javonte Williams as the 3 running backs. Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Rome Odunze, Curtis Samuel. Just 5 receivers. Not great. Probably could have went like Josh Downs there. I already clicked Kmet, but it would have been interesting to add a good 6th receiver there, maybe a Xavier Legette. That said, I only had Kyle Pitts at tight end as well. I think you could have made a case that I needed to add a 4th running back here as well. This is a build structure where I don't feel I'm deep enough anywhere, which is not a great feeling. But I think I have to lean into these top 5 receivers where I took Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers, and T. Higgins all very high. Pretty strong bets on Odunze and Curtis Samuel as well. And then Kmet obviously completing a double stack with Odunze and Caleb Williams and being the right tight end pick for my tight end 2 in that spot. I do sort of break the tie in that one towards the tight end. That's why I had put him at the top of my queue. Even though I think you could justify taking a receiver and say that, certainly down, like when we start talking about tiers, Downs is in that same tier. Some of these running backs, the Charbonnets and stuff are in that same tier as Kmet. But the correlation wins here. BBM, Schultz in 10. It's a 2-2-5-2 now. We've talked a lot about how I wind up with 2-2-6-2 in a lot of drafts through 6 rounds down. So the top of the ADP board here, if I am looking for that 6th receiver, let's look at the build. It's a Stroud, Purdy, Bijan, and Trey Benson. It's interesting. I'm pretty high on Bijan as a potential overall RB1, like legendary upside type play. And if he hits that, Benson's a fun secondary. I do need some extra volume in the early part of the season. I only have 2 guys. Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, JSN, and Cortland Sutton. Pretty good 5. Dalton Kincaid and Dalton Schultz as the 2 tight ends. I did take Dalton Schultz at pick 114 to lock him in. I otherwise would have needed him to come back to 127. His ADP is 126.7. I took Stroud in this draft, 16 picks behind ADP without any of the Texans quarterbacks. So this is a great example of one where I was jacking somebody else's stack probably, and they wanted this great value on Stroud. One of the points I would make about this is when a guy is 16 picks after ADP, it's a very different conversation, because at that point, like, I think all bets are off. You can't begrudge somebody who's taking that type of ADP value. Like, I've seen people get mad that like they didn't get their player to slide all the way to them. Well, if he's already slid this much, I mean, he's just a good pick on his face there. And especially in the case of Stroud, I then said, okay, well, I'll take this big of a discount in the early rounds to then give back 12 picks of ADP value in the double-digit rounds in round 10, where I'll go grab Schultz well ahead of ADP to make sure I do have Stroud stacked up somewhere. And I think this is perfectly fine for how you end up playing the Texans. I also had, I thought I had Zay Flowers on this team. I did not. That was the last team. The point I wanted to make about Cousins that I didn't make, we're going to go back to it. I knew there was something else, is that, like, I don't mind if people do this beyond ADP, but that draft slot, his ADP is 137.9. That guy took him at 134. I was trying to push Cousins to pick 135, 3 picks ahead of ADP, 2.9 picks ahead of ADP, rather than taking him at 130, 7.9 picks ahead of ADP. I thought I had to be prudent. I had to push him closer to his ADP. Somebody took him ahead of ADP unstacked. I mean, all they had was the back, the bring back for week 17. That's not a stack for me, man. Like, it's a game stack for week 17, but like, you still have to get there. Like, it's not, week 17 is obviously the most important thing, and all that stuff is huge, but man, I guess I don't know how I want to articulate this point, but I still think about stacks as a team level thing, a bet on the whole season. I want my team to be really good, and then I try to have a bring back in there so that the week 17 thing can play out very favorably as well. If you're building your team solely through week 17 stacks, like it's a 1-week DFS contest, you're making it so that you now have to get so many things right on the full season level just to get there, because Cousins unstacked as a drop back passer doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, he has to have a really good year. I mean, he could be an okay QB2 without the stacks, but he has to have a really good year as a drop back passer who's not going to scramble at all. He's coming off an Achilles tear on top of it, but he's never been a scrambler. He has to have a really good year to help you in a 2 QB build get there. I suppose you can mostly lean on Lamar in that case, but you're taking him ahead at ADP at the 11-12 turn as your QB2. Like, you want him to be impactful. In which case, you're making a bet on the Falcons offense. Like, you would like to have correlated pieces of that full season bet. It's a different conversation when it's correlated pieces of just week 17 for a drop back passer. That's a much thinner thing. He's saying, did you snipe their QB early on? Maybe they're trying to get me back. Now we're doing forensic work. I took Jalen Hurts with an A.J. Brown team in the 4th after they took Lamar, so no. I mean, maybe because I took Zay Flowers at 34, and then they went Derrick Henry and Lamar, and they really wanted to go Zay Flowers and Lamar, but like, I took Zay at 310 before they had even made those picks. I haven't taken another Baltimore player on this team, a Houston player. I haven't done anything to mess with their stacks. Anyway, we're not going to talk about this draft the whole time. I'm genuinely not that concerned. It'll be, however it works out is however it works out. I was kind of saying that, like, I'm not like mad at them, but it was just that's what made it a little bit more baffling, is that they went ahead of ADP on it as well. Anyway, Back to the team we talked about, the Stroud team, where I took him as this big faller and then backstacked Schultz. I maybe stack-jacked somebody here by taking an unstacked CJ Stroud, but I went ahead and backstacked him, and my whole point here is way different. And Sean says, when someone else says they're willing to pay the rake, I accept. And I mean, that's one way to think about it as well. I took the ADP value here on Stroud, got the stack made. I have an option to take Downs as my wide receiver 6 here at a good price. I also only have the 2 running backs, Jerome Ford and Zach Charbonnet are the top backs. I'm done at tight end. It's one of those 2 picks. I mean, I could go down to like Xavier Legette receiver, and I could go all the way down to Marshawn Lloyd's already off the board. His ADP is rising. He went 1 pick ahead of me here at 137. I could go down to Kendre Miller. I think in a vacuum, you have to take Marshawn Lloyd and Kendre Miller above Austin Eckler. So that's where I think they're going to settle. If you want like my current, like most mispriced guys, those are good examples of that. On this particular team, when it comes back around to 151, I'm not going to probably have Ford or Charbonnet or Dowdle or Kendre Miller making it back to me. Maybe I could get access to Jalen Wright or Ty Chandler becomes my RB3. I was going to use this looking ahead to pick 151 to make a case that I needed to go, or that I could go wide receiver 6 here with Downs, because I would have a lot more options at running back to make it to the next group. But I actually think the Downs tier is going to be gone at receiver before my next pick. He's certainly not coming back. But I actually think this running back tier is going to get wiped out pretty comfortably as well. Although 2 guys behind me here already have 4 backs. I don't know. There's a lot of drafters between me and my next pick. And it's a 2-2-5-2 right now, where Downs is the last of a group, but not like a hugely necessary pick, because I do have Ayuk, Waddle, Higgins, JSN, and Sutton. Feel good about that top 5. I think instead of a 2-2-6-2, we were just talking about how I like that, I'm going to be going 2-3-5-2 in this one. We got Dom in the chat. He says like and subscribe. We're at 901 subscribers. Is that the drum beat? Then it looks like we got some train emojis. We're chugging along towards 1,000. We are moving our way towards 1,000 subscribers, mostly in the last week. I mean, I started these streams last Monday. Really appreciate all the support. Like and subscribe. James says he has notifications on it. Didn't get alerted. That's a bummer, but glad you're here. Glad you're here now. I'm going to go running back here because, I mean, oh man, I just think it's going to be very thin at my 13th round pick. I made that noise because when I see a Bijan pick, I'm like, man, you anchored so heavily. You can really sort of punt RB2. Like, I'm banking on Bijan being the dude every week. With only the 5 receivers, it's a tricky one. I could definitely go either way on this one. But I think I'm just going to be kind of throwing on some later round receivers. Although I was looking at this and going, I don't like any later round Houston guys, and I don't like any later round San Fran guys. I already have those guys single stacked, and I don't think I'm going to be throwing on to my quarterback stacks late. Although, I mean, there's going to be correlation options all the way, through my build. There's late Baltimore guys as a bring back on Houston. Like a Devontae Walker would be fun. There's not really late Detroit guys as a bring back on Purdy. Detroit's kind of already wiped out. So that's just a Purdy Ayuk single stack. That's a good example of where I didn't go out of my way to strongly correlate. Which I don't know if that's wrong. I mean, it's a good example of what I was just saying a little bit ago about my issues with that Cousins pick in that other draft where that person needed to get more things right. I'm now saying I need to get more things right in week 17 because I don't have it all stacked up. I need the Purdy Ayuk stack to be right, but in a way that's also not like the game shooting out because I don't have any Detroit players, or else I need the Stroud Schultz thing to be right, which is, I mean, these are not strong week 17 stories to be telling ourselves. But there's going to be a lot of ways to play wide receiver late that are like little bringbacks on like the Devontae Walker point, a bring back on the Houston thing, which, you know, now that I've figured that out, I should just star these guys. There's Bateman, there's Walker. I don't think I'm taking Downs here. I like him in this range quite a bit. I just passed him on the last draft, so it's like, man, I'm passing him in multiple spots, but I'm going to go running back, which now I got to figure out which running back. I have JSN, so Charbonnet is a little, you know, combination bet on Seattle. I don't have a Chicago bring back on that. Oh, I have Higgins, so Jerome Ford is a bring back on that for week 16. And I have Waddle for Ford for week 17. If Nick Chubb's really never right, maybe Jerome Ford's just the lead back all year. He also fits with Benson in that RB2 discussion where I do think Ford's workload's going to be front-weighted. Benson's probably a back-weighted play. I have not taken Ford yet. We talked about it on the last stream, and I continued to not pull the trigger on him. I've taken a ton of Charbonnet. I've taken Marshawn Lloyd over him, but Lloyd's off the board here. I've definitely taken Kendre Miller over him, but I'm holding out some minor hope that Kendre Miller comes back to 151, which isn't going to happen. I would have taken Miller there in a vacuum, but I think you want to just try to get prices where you can. And Ford fits the build a little better. I have a week 17 and a week 16 thing here. So there's my first Jerome Ford pick over Josh Downs, over Zach Charbonnet. What did I just do? T. Peter says, everyone's so sure Rashee Rice will be suspended this year. I think it's more likely that it would be next season. So I've been scooping in. What are your thoughts on it? I've talked a lot about this. I don't know that I'm going to make a prediction on whether it's this year or next year. There is plenty of conversation that it could be this year. I just know that it hasn't been decided yet. It hasn't been announced yet. And a lot of times we as a fantasy community get more concerned about the length than it actually winds up being. Like, how many times have you heard about a suspension could be the whole year and it comes in as like a 3-gamer? Alvin Kamara comes to mind. He had the assault that was on camera and people were like, he's going to miss half the year. And he ended up having a 3-game suspension. I can't remember many 8-game suspensions. And I've heard that being referenced quite a bit with Rice. And the only ones I can remember that are like longer than that full year has been domestic abuse related. There's been some stuff where guys have been, you know, commissioner exempt for a whole year. Adrian Peterson with his kid, Rashee Rice, just, I guess, never really got re-signed or however that worked out. Or the gambling stuff more recently. And then, like, you know, Josh Gordon had some substance abuse stuff, but that was like in part like multiple failed tests and that kind of thing. These kinds of things tend to like be overhyped what they could mean. And then, but one of the other things that people have said is like, maybe he just is really having a hard time in his life and issues continue to pop up for Rashee Rice. And it's not a great pattern of behavior, right? Like, it's not great that after the car wreck and all the stuff around it, that he then got into the situation at the nightclub while that was, you know, being investigated. The first incident was being investigated. That's a concern. But I tend to fall into the same position as you, T. Peter. I don't think he can be cheaper than he is right now at any point, really. Even if he gets suspended for 6-ish games, he's still going to go there. He was a 2+ yards per route run rookie with Patrick Mahomes. Like, okay, if we get the confirmation he's out the first 8 games, like, that's big. He'll go lower if that happens, if it's an 8-game suspension. But Jameson Williams last year is the one that people were bringing up. Like, he was still going in like pick 100 with a 6-game suspension. because it's all back-weighted production, and that's so important. And Rashee Rice is still going to play for the Chiefs this year, I think. And if he is, he's playing in those really important late season games. Maybe everyone else has just established themselves so much, and when they bring him back after this long suspension, they're not actually using him much. That would be weird, but possible. But I mean, the other thing is you have Andy Reid as a head coach who has a really long track record of not punishing guys with playing time stuff when this type of thing happens. He just uses them. He plays them. When they're able to be used, he uses them. That's how they've been in terms of when they're active and they've served their suspension, he will put them on the field. He's not going to hold them back. So I've been taking a lot of Rice too. If you've watched the other streams, you guys have seen me draft Rice on a lot of teams. Gresh, even with the slow drafts, you find it hard to resist grabbing your guys in later rounds, even when big value falls to you with players from that position group. I tend to pass on the value late. That's a good question in terms of like, am I looking at with this pick? I just took Jerome Ford. It wasn't like a huge value pick, but I'm looking at what maybe it would have been 5 picks later. Jerome Ford has fallen. Him versus taking Kendre Miller closer to cost. In a weird way, I probably would have just taken Kendre Miller in that sense, but in this sense, I was telling myself there was a possibility Miller comes back to me, but once I get closer to Miller's ADP, I don't think Miller's going to come back to me, so I just take him. I tend to just grab my guys too, as Dave's saying, rather than taking the value. It depends on who the value is. If it's a player, I mean, Siegel did an awesome job of this with his rankings last year, but he ranked guys based on, targets, and I've had targets and fades in the past and all that stuff, but he had a category that was like draft after ADP, and then another one that was like don't draft, like fade. So it depends on who's falling, right? Like if it's a player that I want to get exposure to them after ADP, then I might take them. But if it's a player that it's like Ezekiel Elliott falling, I'm like, I don't really even want to draft Ezekiel Elliott. So, I mean, maybe I'll end up taking a little bit of Elliott, but I'm of the mind that he hasn't looked efficient enough to be what people are hoping he's going to be. It's very similar to the Devin Singletary conversation earlier, where like we just can't tell ourselves that anyone else is going to get the work, so it has to be Zeke. But I mean, whether that's Rico Dowdle or not, if Elliott's not good enough, they will bring in someone, right? They'll bring in someone in season. The conversations will be had by week 2, week 3, where they'll start using Malik Davis or something, right? Like people want to talk about Deuce Vaughn. I think Deuce Vaughn's probably too small to ever do it, but they'll bring it. They'd be the team that like last year in season, the Bills brought in Leonard Fournette, and we're thinking about activating him at some point. Largely because Damian Harris was just never going to be healthy, and it was like, okay, well, we need something alongside Latavius Murray. That never worked out with Fournette. The Jets obviously bring in, Dalvin Cook. I don't know who the guy would be for the Cowboys, which is a fair point that people are making. Like, who's going to come in and really challenge Ezekiel Elliott for this like lead role? But I mean, if he's so bad, like you're saying, will they? We're talking about Jerry Jones. Like, if he's as bad as I'm suggesting, you're talking about everyone tweeting about it being just like a clear conversation point. Flip side of that is they chose to bring him back. That's fair, Dom. I mean, maybe I should be taking a little bit of him, honestly, but Sean says if you're not super in on Chubb, you probably have to be in on Ford. Brown's backfield is one we surely must like. Talked about this a little bit on the last stream, but it's a deep depth chart. So they brought in Deontay Foreman. Some people are in on him. I don't really think I'm super in on him. They gave Nyheim Hines a decent amount of guaranteed money, probably just to be a returner, but he's there too. He might play on passing downs and get back to like what he used to be a little bit. And then they also traded in season for Pierre Strong last year, who I still like as a talent. Pierre Strong, probably the biggest threat in my mind if Chubb never really happens. But then there's also a thing to that question of I'm not in on Chubb because I don't really trust it, but I also think that when he plays, he gets work, even if that's inefficient work that doesn't make him necessarily the right play because he's getting a half season of inefficient and not full workloads. But then that also could sink whoever's doing well for the back-weighted production element. Like if it's Ford that does really well or plays for most of it for the first 7 or 8 weeks, and then Chubb is starting to really make an impact in terms of the overall workload in week 9, week 10-ish, and then you're barreling towards the fantasy playoffs with like a 50-50 split, and there's a third guy working in. Hines is playing on pass downs, and none of it's like super efficient. And you're like, yeah, I mean, the Browns is a good offense, but none of these picks ended up being right. Ford's role got sunk by Chubb coming back. Chubb's role was never good enough to carry. It's possible, but it's just one of those things where I'm like, it could just be muddy for everybody. There's probably going to be usable weeks within that. If what I just described happens, Jerome Ford's probably a decent little win rate player in the first, because of his production in the first part of the year. But Wad said, I feel like you got to be in on one of them, whether it's Chubb, Ford, Foreman. I'm kind of making the case that I don't know that you have to be. This is another good point from Hoosier. It's May/June. I'm taking Rice and enjoying his falling ADP. That's sort of what I'm saying as well. Like we have 3 months until this has to really be sorted out. We're going to learn a lot more in those 3 months, but most of those scenarios of what happens in the next 3 months, I think, increase Rashee Rice's value. And, you're trying to limit dead roster spots at this point when you're drafting, but at the same time, I don't really it doesn't. Some of these teams are going to be dead. Like they're going I'm aware that as I draft these 45 teams or whatever, some of these teams are going to have dead roster spots and they're not going to be strong. I'm willing to take the upside swing that I built a really strong roster that was, has a Rashee Rice. It was 6 rounds mispriced, which I think is possible. So that's kind of that move. Dom, it was more fun pre-draft 19th round to be sure. That's the Zeke reference. And this is the other thing is like his price has gotten to a spot where definitely think the people who are drafting in pre-draft in the 19th round won. Like in some cases, I'll say the CLV is not even like that indicative because I don't think the player should be going higher. I do think you were right if you were drafting him in the pre-draft range in the 19th round. You crushed it. But where he's at now, I'm concerned about. All right. I'm not saying I'm fading the Browns running back room. I've taken some Chubb as he's fallen significantly behind ADP. I just took Ford in the last draft. And then I'm fading it more than other people because I think it's possible that I'm not taking Deontay Foreman either, really. I think it's possible Pierre Strong matters to not for fantasy necessarily, but to the workload splits, or that Nyheim Hines matters. Somebody who's not drafted. And I don't want to go chase them. And even though they're going to be low owned, I don't want to chase that. I just think it's a deep running back room. There's a lot of names. So I'm not fading it. I'm underweight on it for sure. Yeah, these are tricky guys, Tiger Uppercut. More Chubb and Hawkinson than I probably should. I'm trying to avoid those guys. All right, jumped into another draft here. 2-5-6-2 build. I got to go to the draft. I got a bunch of late round receivers starred. We're already in the 16th round here, and I only have 6 receivers still. Josh Allen, Jordan Love at QB, Jonathan Brooks, Javonte Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, Kendre Miller, Khalil Herbert at running back. So you get both Lloyd and Kendre Miller in there. Talked about them. I took them both well ahead of ADP. You can see here I took Lloyd at 130 as a 144 ADP guy. I still think that's a value. I was just saying I think he should be going much, much higher than he is. And then I got Miller at 135. One of the advantages to taking Lloyd there is that I can then grab Miller on the way back, get them both. And I probably took him ahead of somebody notable. Yeah, I took them both ahead of Jerome Ford in this draft, both ahead of Zeke in this draft, both ahead of Rico Dowdle in this draft. That's where I'm at with it. Oh, it's also a Jordan Love team. So that's part of why I grabbed Marshawn Lloyd. And then when it came back, I grabbed Miller. So that helps to add some color to the conversation we were just having. Dom says Hawk falls to the 14th. Sometimes now it's getting really hard not to click him for a late 3 tight end build. I have drafted him. Same thing I'm feeling with Chubb. I've ended up clicking Chubb more. I think there's a lot of certainty that these guys can't come back and be productive. And when they start to fall to a certain point, it at least gets interesting to discuss and think through. Wide receiver, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, Deontay Johnson, and then I added Marvin Mims. So this is really a wide receiver, a 5 wide receiver build, but a good one. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave is a lot of volume, and then I added Deontay Johnson for volume. I got 2 rookies in between there. A lot of upside in there with Xavier Worthy and Keon Coleman, and I would argue for both probably a lot of stability in their role. I was concerned about how much Worthy might play earlier, but now that we're feeling like Rashee Rice is probably going to be suspended at least for some time, Worthy probably gets on the field early, which is, I mean, it's a big boost to his profile. I took Mims. I'm not taking a ton of Mims, but I had Javonte on this team. Do I have Bengals? I don't have any Bengals. I'm kind of curious why I took Mims there. Oh, is it a QB thing for Knicks? No, because I have 2 QBs. I'm not entirely sure. I guess I just thought he was the best receiver on the board at that point. Travis Kelce and Luke Musgrave are the tight ends. Musgrave was a really nice tight end too. I like getting him as a tight end too. Dom actually talked me into him after I wrote my Targets Per Out Run articles earlier this offseason. He made a nice little case relative to my case, which was a little bit more bearish on the tight end situation for Green Bay, just sort of because their wide receivers are there and they might use both tight ends. There might be split usage too much, but especially now that Michael Mayer is off the board as a second round, late round tight end, like there's not upside where Musgrave goes. I mean, Sinat goes ahead of him. He's really the last tight end that I feel solid about. And, you know, if you're making a bet on the Green Bay offense, I've expressed a little bit of skepticism about the Green Bay offense. I'm not all in, but if I have a Jordan Love team and actually no Green Bay wide receivers. So this is a Jordan Love, Marshawn Lloyd, Luke Musgrave team. In terms of how I stacked him up, I got him 21 picks after ADP. So similar to the Stroud conversation earlier and making sure I got Dalton Schultz, I took Love. I wasn't able to get Wicks, who went well ahead of ADP. We talked through this team. I thought I would get Wicks at my next pick. It was before his ADP, but Wicks sometimes goes 15 picks ahead of ADP right now, and he did. And I had to make sure I got Musgrave, which I did, which was fortunate. So anyway, I got I'm back on the clock here on the 16th. I have a nice 5 running back build here. I really like Jonathan Brooks and Javonte Williams together because I think Williams' volume is really strong. Brooks is more of a back-weighted guy. I like to pair those types of profiles, very similar to the conversation a minute ago with Trey Benson and Jerome Ford on that other build. You want to get that texture in your running back builds of different types of production at different times of the year. Marshawn Lloyd, Kendre Miller, more traditional later round plays. And so then I took Khalil Herbert, which is a little bit more of a direct backup, going to have some volume most weeks. Also, I think some low-key handcuff upside, right? But also Roshan Johnson would probably fit in there, so not as extreme. But if DeAndre Swift missed time, we know DeAndre Swift can get banged up. I think Khalil Herbert and Roshan Johnson are both very draftable where they go around 180 picks into drafts. But he adds a little bit more stability throughout the season. I think his production will just be, occasionally there throughout the season. Helps a little bit on the front end if the other guys aren't playing a ton. But one of the big things about Lloyd is it sounds like Lloyd's going to be playing a lot from the beginning. That's why I think he's so underpriced. I think you're getting handcuff appeal plus standalone. So early season, even if Jonathan Brooks isn't out there, even if Kendre Miller hasn't really carved out a niche right away, Javonte Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, Khalil Herbert should float. It's a nice 5 running back build. I like the way that comes together. I think I got to go receiver again here. Chuba Hubbard's the top running back. Dameon Pierce is, a viable later round one, but I don't think I need to go running back. I starred all the top receivers, and I guess I was saying to myself, these are all very viable picks here. Why did I move Zay Jones ahead of Demario Douglas? Do I have an Arizona thing happening here? I don't. Anyway, I'm going to take Javon Baker. I don't have a Charger either. None of this correlates. All four of these guys are uncorrelated. I don't have a Charger. I don't have Arizona. And I don't have the Rams. So in my queue right now is Javon Baker, Zay Jones, Demario Douglas, Demarcus Robinson. Baker's the upside fun play. Zay Jones probably going to run some decent routes for the Cardinals. Demarcus Robinson as well. I've taken him on some of these teams where I just feel like I need routes. Again, the texture of the build. If I have a lot of rookies, a lot of upside plays in my wide receiver build, Demarcus Robinson I've taken him well ahead of ADP sometimes because I think he's going to play in 3 wide receiver sets because of his run blocking. That's why I took the role from Tutu Atwell. And because of that, he kept it. And because of that, they re-signed him. And if you go look at, they're a concentrated offense. That means you go look at his playing time. That means he played a lot. You go look at his game log. That means that he was able to have some usable weeks down the stretch. He caught touchdowns in 4 straight games at one point. He's not going to give you 100-yard games, but he can give you 40 yards and a TD. And, I said 40 yards, but 40, 45, 55 with the catches that have, 4 catches for 55 and a TD he did in week 13. That's 13.5. That's helpful, right? The next week, 3 for 46 and a TD. That's 12.1 or something. The next week, 2 for 44 and a TD. That's 11.4. The next week, 6 for 82 and a TD. And if you get the 6 for 82 sometimes, then you're up at 17.2 or whatever it is. So some usable weeks from him down the stretch, big time. Probably need the TDs. He's pretty, he's going to have a lot of games that are not that usable, but my buddy Alex P. Keaton here says Rice won't be suspended if the court case is not completed, which is unlikely. Goodell already said he'll wait for the legal outcome. I think that's interesting. I didn't know that little note. It's possible that Rice doesn't even get suspended. Anyway, I'm going to take Javon Baker on this team. Throw a wide receiver 7 on it. Another kind of upside play. Rookie with an intriguing profile there. I got to start making some quicker builds or quicker picks. I was only thinking I'd go 2 hours today. I've been going 3 hours on a lot of these. Appreciate you guys hanging out. This is a Bijan team with Drake London in the second round. I have Kirk Cousins starred. Here it is. Here's the exact situation again. Although this time I have to float him 6 picks if I try to send Kirk Cousins around the turn. And all 3 drafters behind me only have 1 QB. And Kyle Pitts is on one of those teams. So this is actually not the exact situation. This is a situation where I do want Cousins, and I'm about the same spot. I'm at pick 129, and I would have to push him to 136. His ADP is 137.7. Theoretically, by ADP, pushing him around this turn could be possible. But in this case, one of the guys on the turn has 2 picks and has Kyle Pitts and only has 1 quarterback. So this is not one where I think pushing him around the corner makes any sense. It is interesting. Jared Goff is still sitting there. ADP of 122 has slid in a little bit. I guess he's not sliding a ton. I'm still only at pick 129. So this team is a Kyler Murray, Bijan Robinson, Trey Benson. It only has McBride at tight end. So a 1 QB, 1 tight end at this point, 1-2-6-1. And it's got Benson with that Arizona build. Drake London, DK Metcalf, Xavier Worthy, Roma Dunze, Rashee Rice, and Mike Williams. It doesn't have a Ram coming back. I just said all these nice things about DeMarcus Robinson. So real quick, while I'm thinking about this team, I'm going to go star DeMarcus Robinson for like the late rounds. I'm going to remember that I'm going to make him the wide receiver 8 on this team. It's already got Rashee Rice, who's potentially suspended. We've been talking about 2 rookies. It's got a lot of back-weighted stuff anyway. Tight end, we are at Hawkinson, but it's only 1109. Dom was just talking about, you're talking about the 14th round as, being a value there. Cole Kmet, intriguing. Luke Musgrave, Pat Freiermuth, Ben Sinnott. Oh, Sinnott's behind Musgrave in ADP. For some reason, I thought he slid a spot ahead of Musgrave. But that really, to me, is where it kind of ends. Maybe Hunter Henry. You don't want to be in the Kate Otten, Jawan Johnson group if you're me. least what I feel about it. At that point, I would just go all the way down to Noah Fant. But it's tricky. we got Kaz in the chat too. He says to Marcus Robinson, we're so back. So we got Dom, Sean, and Kaz, the whole Go Bills team. You guys are lucky. You guys are lucky. The rest of you watching, you got some legit fantasy studs hanging out in the chat. Appreciate you guys. Dom says he can hang and chop it up about slows all day. We got Bijan, London. Yeah, sorry. I'm taking Cousins. We already decided. I'm looking through the rest of the tight ends to figure out what I want to do at tight end. I think there's options there. I could even potentially take Komet at 12.4 if he swings back around. That's a little after his ADP. I already got my 2.261 right now. That would make it a 2.262, which I like to be at after 12 rounds. We kind of talked through. I don't need to go running back at this point. I could as well at 136 if that makes sense. I definitely don't need to go wide receiver if I already had 6 through 10 rounds. Mike Williams as my wide receiver 6. Rashee Rice as my wide receiver 5 behind ADP, pick 88. Easy pick to take Cousins there, and I still somehow made it take 10 minutes. All right, let's go to the eliminator. In the 12-hole, A.J. Brown, Drake London, DK Metcalf, Cooper Kupp, Xavier Worthy, 5 straight wide receivers. I took George Kittle ahead of Kyle Pitts because of the buys, a big thing in an eliminator. San Francisco players share a bye with only the Steelers, one of the 2 weeks that has only 2 teams on bye. You don't end up stacking your buys if you play San Francisco players. Rashee Rice, I did actually wind up stacking this bye, though, because I took Jalen Warren and Brock Purdy. David Njoku, Dontavian Wicks. I took Kirk Cousins to stack with Drake London in this one as well. Again, really like the Atlanta offense situation in terms of really weak schedule, playing a dome, nice playoff schedule, and then pass rate increase. And then as far as their skill players, potential big time snap rate increases, just more concentration with the way that they do things with the Rams, which is where Zach Robinson came over from. So very into Atlanta. Been talking about them quite a bit. I had also starred. So right now I have a 2-1-7-2 in this eliminator where I'm more likely to be more imbalanced. I starred Deshaun Watson despite already taking both Purdy and Cousins, and I think I was thinking this could be a 3 QB build for an eliminator where they're all single stacked. It's an interesting way to play the eliminator because it's harder to obviously get super concentrated. I have the Cousins London. I have the Purdy Kittle. It's harder to get super concentrated with your stacks because you don't want to stack all your buys. I have Njoku on this team. So if I took Deshaun Watson here, it's a nice 3 QB build. I don't really have to get deep with my wide receivers because they're so good. A.J. Brown, Drake London, DK Metcalf, Cooper Kupp, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Dontavian Wicks. I don't even know if I need an 8th. I'm going to do a 2 tight end build. 3-6-7-2. Take Watson at this turn and just ride out running backs the rest of the way. God, this is a good eliminator team. I wrote about the eliminator in my Substack, bengreshop.substack.com. Subscribe there if you want to read about it. Definitely subscribe here on YouTube. But one of my cases was this kind of imbalanced build allows you to be pretty heavy. Okay, so one issue with the wide receivers, I have 3 week 6 buys at receiver. Was not trying to stack buys like that too much. So it means if I stop at 7, I only have A.J. Brown, Drake London, and Metcalf plus Dontavian Wicks for week 6. I think I can get by with that, though. Dom says you can go ahead and unstar Watson here. I don't need to take him, and he definitely brings down the morale of the whole build. Man, there's only one running back worth taking. Ray Davis, and then I think it's a big drop-off to Tyler Algier, Antonio Gibson, My next running back might be Bucky Irving at ADP of 175, who maybe won't make it back, but could make it back. I probably should be going running back here because I've really pushed it off. All I've taken is Jaylen Warren. The ADP value is actually at tight end. Luke Musgrave and Ben Sinnott made it. Dom's got an interesting point here. He says he's a little Galbraith on a shoulder injury. Seems super likely to re-injure. Rare deltoid fracture. That's on Deshaun Watson. Why did they not bring back Flacco? If they brought back Flacco, I probably wouldn't have drafted Watson. The fact that they let Flacco walk when he played well for him down the stretch, they could have just paid him to be their backup QB, was a little bit weird to me. I mean, he seemed to be happy there, and they brought in Jameis Winston, which is still like it's a move toward, valuing backup quarterback, but I guess Jameis Winston over Joe Flacco in terms of. Now I'm looking up their contracts to see if they paid Winston more than Flacco, which I would presume they had to. They gave him a 1-year $4 million deal, and then they gave him 4 void years so they could spread out the signing bonus over 5 years. So they must have had some cap problems. They probably couldn't do 4 void years on Joe Flacco being 39. Flacco signed a 1-year $4.5 million deal with the Colts, and it's fully guaranteed. Interesting. I'm going to take Ray Davis on this team, on this eliminator build. I don't see any reason to take a receiver other than that huge buy stack up. I could feasibly take a wide receiver 8 eventually. I don't need another tight end. I am going to take Deshaun Watson. It's gross, but the triple stack thing is helpful for the later season stuff. You do need upside as the pods get smaller. It's possible that Dom's going to prove to be right and I'm going to be way wrong. We're just going to move on from this team really quickly and pretend like I didn't just draft a serial sexual abuser. Back on the clock in the 13th round, 2-3-5-2. Jaden Daniels, Tua Tagovailoa, Devon Achane, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Terry McLaurin, Keon Coleman, JSN, Trey McBride, David Njoku. So I have a Tua. This is one of my favorite teams because the stacks do come together in this one, even though I wasn't like really heavily trying to do it. And it's fun when you get that. I definitely like when my teams are correlated. This is a Tua, Achane, Tyreek with an Njoku bring back. It's a Daniels, McLaurin. Oh, this isn't the really heavily stacked one. There's a different one that has Tua, Achane, and Tyreek with, I think it has multiple Browns brings backs, and the other quarterback is heavily stacked. This one just has Daniels with McLaurin. No Atlanta players coming back on this one yet. But Kendre Miller's my starred player. I only have 3 running backs, Achane, Brown, and Charbonnet. Miller is 3 picks behind ADP. I just talked about he's one guy that I think is undervalued. It's a running back pick here, even though I only have 5 receivers. It's just not a spot where I have to push at receiver or that I'm going to fix the build at receiver. I got to just trust that these 5 receivers are strong enough. 2 good tight ends can maybe help me at the flex. Achane, Chase Brown, Charbonnet, and now adding Kendre Miller. Maybe the running backs can help me at the flex because I do really like that 4 running back build. It's a fun team so far as long as I can figure out wide receiver. All right, let's hit a couple more. This is a 0-3-6-2. I have a ton of quarterbacks starred, including Deshaun Watson. I do think as far as Watson goes, no one wants to draft him, and rightfully so. But he is a little bit mobile. He did have some really strong passing numbers in his past. He has had a very weird to analyze career. And typically speaking, I'm talking about you're looking for outliers and weird stuff. And as far as a guy maybe potentially bouncing back from how terrible he's been the last 2 years, and he has been terrible. And that's been, we've all enjoyed the Schadenfreude or whatever the word is. And hopefully I'm using it right. As far as a guy bouncing back from really bad play, you could make a case that somebody in his situation would maybe be more likely to not play up to his actual talent level for an extended period of time because of all the booing and all of the other just hit to his ego and things like from a personal level. I've compared this to Tiger Woods, which is unfair to Tiger Woods because Tiger Woods didn't get accused of sexual assault, but he did commit adultery and all those other things. When Tiger Woods came back to golf after his whole ordeal, courses used to be 100% behind him. They were cheering the heck out of him every swing. Other golfers would talk about they would know where Tiger was on the course based on where the roars were at which green 2 holes over. And then as soon as he came back, everybody hated him. Like people went back to rooting for Tiger Woods, but the immediate short term after Tiger came back, he was getting jeered constantly on golf courses, and the whole atmosphere through which he had to stay focused and perform at his task in his career changed, right? And so it is on a personal level, it's a shot to your ego. It affects the way that you're able to perform. A little bit different for golf, where it is a very mental game and you're right there with the fans. But I think that's something that could be considered in terms of how it could take Watson some time to get back to a higher level of play. The main case I would make is that he has the kind of dual threat profile. There is the potential for him to be, we got a golf account, back 9 bets, as we're talking golf on here. There's the potential for him to be a late round, upside quarterback in a way that the other late round quarterbacks, I mean, the guy's directly behind him in ADP, and Baker Mayfield's tied with him in ADP and doesn't provide much mobility and only threw doesn't provide much upside. I think he threw 28 TDs last year, not like a 35 TD kind of guy. Geno Smith, I don't even know if he's playing 17 games. Will Levis, we talked through recently, outside of his 4 touchdown game in his first start, did not have a great year last year, actually. JJ McCarthy, Bryce Young, Derek Carr, Drake May. You can make some cases for upside down the list. Daniel Jones, Bo Nix. Those are the other guys I have starred here. Justin Fields. I know Sean likes to take him. Sean Siegel. But at this stage, man, like there's not a ton of profiles. And so anyway, I do think it makes Deshaun Watson relevant for these builds, even though I do not want him to be relevant for these builds. Luke says he was bad for fantasy last year. I know it wasn't a fun watch, but with the exception of that indie game, his floor wasn't bad. The exception of that indie game, his floor was 17.95. That's the thing. Yeah, his profile is conducive to fantasy scoring. If you go look at his actual scoring, it's not horrible. Luke's saying that's in a 6-point per passing scoring system. His floor was 17.95. If he stays healthy, he's going to beat this ADP. Is sort of like, I mean, in that offense, they brought in Jerry Jeudy, and they don't have a consistent run game now without Nick Chubb, so they're going to have to lean on Watson a little more. I mean, I don't want him to be relevant for fantasy, but he likely is. I don't know how more people aren't excited about Bryce Young in year 2. He was really, really bad last year. That's the main reason, but I'm also in. Like I am in at cost on him. He's a guy who could certainly improve with a better coaching staff, with the improvements at the receiving core, which they had a bad receiving core last year. That doesn't mean he wasn't bad, but Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette could potentially really improve the floor of that receiving core. Back 9 Bets asks if I reckon that Sam Howell is going to take Geno's place. I think that's possible, right? Not likely, but possible at least. Anyway, Watson in my queue here. A lot of other guys in my queue. This is a late round quarterback build. It's a Christian McCaffrey, Raheem Mostert, Devin Singletary. So we got the vet running backs, the more fragile profiles hanging out here. Stephon Diggs, Jalen Waddle. I have a Waddle Mostert. So I think I wanted Tua, and I think he went before me on this one. Diggs, Waddle, Christian Kirk, Jordan Addison, Rashee Rice, Jerry Jeudy, Mark Andrews, David Njoku. So one of the things I had to do after I lost some of the other quarterback builds I wanted we'll start thinking about how to stack it some other ways. Judy was a decent pick by ADP. I already had Njoku. This is one where I actually played for a Deshaun Watson pick. I basically was like, I'm going to have to set up a Deshaun Watson team. At the turn, this is the one where at the 10-11 turn where I took Judy. Just before that, and the 5 picks before that, all of Trevor Lawrence, Tua, and Justin Herbert went off the board. I could have went Herbert Palmer at that turn, which I've talked about at times. Tua was a clear play, and Lawrence was a play as well because I had Christian Kirk. And so I think I had multiple outs at quarterback at a point where and then I took Devin Singletary at 121, 13 picks behind ADP. Not taking a lot of Singletary, but I do remember I took him because I was like, well, at least I'll have a New York Giants piece to potentially play Daniel Jones late. And I think I had starred Wan'Dale Robinson, so he must have gone. Oh, no, he didn't. Okay. So I might throw him on and make a little backdoor Giants thing. So Watson, I took both Judy and Njoku. He's a 164 ADP, and I'm not back up until 168, 169. I got to try to push him to there at least. Because otherwise I'll just do a 3 QB late round thing that I'm okay with. I'm not going to take him this far ahead of ADP, which means that at this spot, I got to address some other stuff. I only have the 3 running backs. Oh, we're still in. So Kendre Miller has gone off the board, but we're right in Marshawn Lloyd territory. He's going to go here. The other pick is going to be one of Ford, Dowdle, Jalen Wright. Chat's asking why no JJ McCarthy in that queue. I mean, that's a fair point. I think I probably just missed him, but I also like a little worried, more worried about his profile, right? Like the actual talent level. Yeah, you're right. And this is Cause saying it. I didn't notice that was you, but I guess I'm more worried that he gets benched or something is really what it comes down to. I'm a little bit concerned about McCarthy. What does this one say? Random question. What do you typically do with the extra 2 roster spots in DK? I don't, so I can't draft live. That's why we're doing all these slow drafts. And I haven't been doing a lot of DKs. So I've done them in the past, but I have not done any this year, actually. So I don't really feel prepared to answer that question in a good way. Cardio Club drafts with soothing Gretch in the background. Glad that you're enjoying that. I've gotten that soothing word twice. I said I'm a little bit like hoarse today, like a little bit of a sore throat. So I wonder if that's making my voice a little more enjoyable. All right, we're gonna push quarterback. We just took Marshawn Lloyd, and then we're also going to take So I have the Judy and Njoku. I got to take Jerome Ford, and I'm really just playing a Browns thing. I have Waddle and Mostert. That's the other reason I did the Deshaun Watson thing is I had the Miami guys. I lost out on Tua, so I turned it into the other side of the Week 17 thing. So maybe Watson comes back. Maybe he doesn't. I need him to. I'm going to take Ford in the off chance that he does. A good question here would be, why not take Rico Dowdle if I'm so out on Zeke? And I think that's a fair question that I've asked myself a lot. And I probably should be taking more Rico Dowdle if I'm so out on Zeke. But I took Ford because of the correlation stuff. All right, let's go to another Best Ball Mania here. We got Amon-Ra, Taylor, Diggs. I'm going to actually just go back to the other window. 2 running backs, 5 receivers, 1 tight end. No quarterbacks yet. This one's only in the 9th round. So this has been one of my slower moving ones. Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift. It's got Amon-Ra. So I had Jared Goff starred, but I'm still not even to his ADP, really anywhere close to it. Still 20 picks ahead of it. Amon-Ra, Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Lad McConkey, and Christian Watson. Because of the McConkey pick, I have Herbert starred in there. Because of the Christian Watson pick, I would have assumed that I had Jordan Love starred. He is already off the board. He was okay. His ADP is 91.2, 91.8. He went 95. I'm at pick 102. So he could have potentially been a pick here if he fell 10 picks past ADP, which he does sometimes, but he did not. And I just want to highlight this in the chat. I'm not going to read it all, but Dom is giving some great advice. If you were curious about that DK question, Dom Briani is somebody who I would rubber stamp basically anything he says about fantasy football. I already mentioned these guys are 2-time defending FFPC main event champions and high stakes season long. Dom, Nick Cosentino, our buddy Sean Stutzman, the whole Go Bills gang in the chat. Great to get the band back together in the Stealing Signals chat. So I have a 0-2-5-1. I have these QBs starred that I'm not going to be taking here. I can't get love with the Watson pick. I could go wide receiver 6. It's the Tyler Lockett, Mike Williams range. That's probably where I'm going to go. I already have DeAndre Swift, so you get the Tyler Lockett Swift thing. The other option is David Njoku, who falls behind ADP here and is the best remaining tight end 2. That's the thing I wanted to check on before I snap picked Tyler Lockett. And if Njoku's sitting there behind ADP and I don't have a second tight end, I'm basically always going to take him. Tyler Lockett would have been right at ADP. Their ADPs are only 4 picks apart. It's not like a big difference. But to me, in a build where I already have 5 receivers, getting that second tight end here and not having to play the late round tight end game is pretty nice. And Njoku's maybe, I think, the most mispriced of the tight ends, where he doesn't belong in the elite group, but he's closer to Ingram than Jake Ferguson, who's going closer to Ingram than Njoku. Ferguson's going like 82, and Njoku's going like 98, and those two should definitely be flipped. I think Ferguson should even be a little bit further behind that, although I get it. I mean, they don't have any other clear secondary passing options in Dallas. All right, I took Njoku there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're gonna spin the wheel right now. I gotta find the wheel. Did I close the wheel? Dang it. Now I gotta figure out what teams to take off the wheel. And I gotta go find. I had it open, and I think my my browser. Oh, sweet! It actually autofills for you from the last time you were on the site. That's the good stuff. All right, I'm taking the hat off. I got a haircut yesterday. You guys are going to see the flowing locks. They're not flowing. They're nice and trimmed up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do I have? Yeah, the Colts aren't on here. The Chargers aren't on here. Okay, I don't have to do anything. All right, you guys ready to remember some guys? Here's the deal. Whatever team comes up, we're going to remember some dudes from fantasy football history. The New Orleans Saints. We're going to go more. We're going to go. What do you guys got in the chat? I want to give you guys a sec. Those are the first two that popped into my head. Robert Meacham, Devery Henderson, obviously, Jimmy Graham, Marcus Colston, Darren Sproles, Reggie Bush. Go back to Deuce McAllister. Oh, Joe Horn. I like that one, Donnie Shea. He had the cell phone celebration. That was a fantastic time in football with all the celebrations. They're starting to use props and everything, and then the NFL decided to crack down on it. But Joe Horn was a star then. Who was his number 2 at that time? There was another receiver there. Oh, Aaron Brooks was the quarterback at that time. He was a fun fantasy QB for a stretch. So when we spin the wheel, one of the things we'd like to do then is to talk about the team. And that's sort of the idea, is it's an opportunity to dig into some of these individual teams. Talked about Kendre Miller a lot, so it's a good opportunity to look at him. I don't know if Darnay Scott was a Saint. That's a good question. The reason I would highlight Kendre Miller twofold. Let's start on Miller's page. I always do that. I always open a new tab, but I got to click on it. Let's start on his page. So he gets banged up. He hurts his hammy early in the year. I'm going to highlight the offensive snaps column over here on the right, or I'm not actually able to highlight it on the screen, but I'm going to try and tell you it. He didn't play in weeks 1 and 2. He only gets 21 snaps in week 3, but I think he re-injured. He only got 5 snaps in week 4, 26 and 18 the next couple weeks, and he's 3, 9, 6, and then he's inactive for basically the rest of the year. He plays 24 snaps. In week 18, he rushes 13 times, 73 yards, and a TD. He's actually very efficient once they bring him back in week 18 and let him run a little bit. We got Dante Stallworth. That's a good call. Willie the Thrill Jackson. That's before my time. Willie Jackson is like, I feel like the 80s or something. Now I got to know. Willie Jackson. 95 to 2002. Played for the Saints 2000, 2001. Had a 1,000-yard season in 2001. How do I not remember this guy? He was with Joe Horn in 2000. Huh. I don't even remember this dude. All right, Kendre Miller really didn't play a lot. I mean, look at this total number of snaps. He has a couple 20-snap games, an 18-snap game, but we really don't get to see the thesis that Week 18 game is really promising, right? Though, when he gets the opportunity, they liked him. They talked about him a lot in the offseason. This is why we all drafted him. He was a young rookie. He's still only age 21. That's one of the reasons that we were so into him in fantasy. So he's about to turn 22 here in June, which is, I mean, that's big, right? We still got this guy that's super young that they really liked. Didn't get a play a lot last season, but the two guys ahead of him, Jamal Williams has a 2.9 yards per carry on 106 carries. He's still there, but he's not what he once was. That was his age 28 season last year. He's going to be 29. Taysom Hill's going to be 34. He's still going to factor into the rushing equation. He had 81 carries last year, which is sort of annoying, but I feel like the Taysom Hill stuff was 5 years ago, and it's every time you look at the Saints stuff, you're like, man, he was still there. He's always there. And then Alvin Kamara wasn't horrible last year, still only 3.9 yards per carry. He's another year older. The yards per target was really low, 5.4 for him. When you start to see the efficiency drop across the board, for the rushing efficiency, he used to be a 5 yards per carry guy early in his career. Rookie season, 6.1, led the NFL, 4.6, 4.7, 5.0. And then at 26, he was at a 3.7, a 4.0, a 3.9. That's 3 years in a row where the rushing efficiency hasn't been there. The yards per target on the receiving side, 8.3 early in his career, 6.8, 5.5, 7.1. That still stayed up above 6, which the average for a running back is about 6.0. 6.6, 6.4. Last year, it falls to 5.4, despite a really high catch rate. So catch rate helps yards per target. You're catching more of your targets. Look at his yards per reception. 10.2, 8.8, 6.6, 9.1, 9.3, 8.6 in 2022 still. Last year fell to 6.2. So this is when you start to say, okay, this running back might be over the edge. I'm a little bit concerned. In July, he turns 29. Still really love Alvin Kamara. This guy was on one of my best ever finishes in the main event. Speaking of, main event champions here that we have in the chat, but big fan of Kamara's. I think he's probably over the edge. I have over the age curve. I have not drafted him at all. I don't think Jamal Williams is a real risk for the RB2 stuff after he goes for 2.9 yards per carry on 100 plus carries last year. They don't draft anyone else, though, because they still have both Kamara and Jamal Williams under contract. Am I painting a pretty enough picture here? They did bring in James Robinson, who looks like he never is going to come back from that Achilles. Kendre Miller was a day 2 pick, a round 3 guy who just didn't play a lot as a 21-year-old rookie, but is coming back as a 22-year-old into a backfield that the incumbents are non-threatening. If you told me Kendre Miller took over this backfield by like week 4 or week 2 even, and is this year's Kyren Williams and is just the starter for most of the season, I would not have a hard time believing that. I'd be a little bit surprised that Kamara got displaced that quick, but if he displaces Jamal Williams, Taysom Hill, and every other possible touch, and then pushes Kamara into a committee, it's a Miller-Kamara committee by like week 3 or 4, I believe that. I mean, Kendre Miller's going to have a role, guys. Like, he's going to be a standalone value guy with handcuff upside. You can't look at these other running backs and their ages and where the rest of this depth chart is and tell me that it's not Kendre Miller's year after, yes, an injury-prone year last year. But he's a fantastic pick at this stage in the offseason, 145 ADP. We were just talking about it. Looking at this more has got me just more excited. He made a ridiculous reception on a downfield play early in the year. That was his long reception here of 33 yards. I'm trying to highlight it. Early in the year last year, he only caught 10 balls all year, but he does have a receiving background too. He was a do-everything player at TCU. So really like him. The other thing to highlight on this team is that Chris Olave, I mean, the way Sean Siegel put it when we were talking about him a month or so ago, is there might be a bigger gap between Olave and the rest of the receivers in this passing game than the size of the gap might be bigger than any other offense, but the number one option and the rest of the receivers with the size of the gap on those offenses. God, I said that so cleanly. That is how you do radio. Chris Olave is the clear number one, dominated per route run volume. He's got a really high ADOT for all these targets. So he's got a really strong targets per out run, really strong weighted targets per out run when you bring in the air yards. Rashid Shaheed is like your rotational deep threat. Michael Thomas is gone now and had 64 targets. I saw Hayden Winks throw a tweet out there the other day. Chris Olave, high ADOT guy. Rashid Shaheed, high ADOT guy. And A.T. Perry is really like their number 3. I think he referenced also kind of a high ADOT guy. He's like, there's somebody that's going to catch a lot of underneath passes in this passing game. A lot of people are excited about Jawan Johnson on that question. Who's going to be the dude that catches all that stuff? I'm going to go back to my handy dandy yards per out run database that I love to jump into. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Jawan Johnson, I told you guys, when you start to see guys that are not earning volume, he had an 18.8% targets per out run last year. Oh, we did talk about him. We actually pulled him up the other day. I remember this profile. But don't necessarily love him. When you start looking at Olave, the targets per out run over 25% both years at ADOTs that are 15, 14 yards downfield. These weighted targets per out run numbers are among the league leaders. There he is. I have this sorted by weighted targets per out run on this other tab. He's 5th in the NFL last year in weighted targets per out run. If Olave hits for any efficiency, because the yards per target was down at 8.1 last year, which is weird for a high ADOT guy who's good. 9.2 the year prior. I mean, back-to-back 2+ yards per out run seasons to start a career is a great indicator. But if this yards per target hits in a big way, like a 9.5 type season, he's a smash. He's a really, really strong. He's a really, really strong pick. And he was going to the 3rd round early. I mentioned on the last stream I had some stuff in early April that I wrote and I was kind of proud of when I was looking back at it. One of the things I wrote was like, Chris Olave does not belong in the 3rd round. He's one of these guys that needs to come, because I had written about the 2nd round being a challenging round, which it remains in drafts. But I was like, short of like Chris Olave making this huge jump to the early 2nd round, it's hard for the late 2nd round receivers to jump because they don't project for this type of volume. And then Olave made that huge jump. There were some other calls I had in those pieces that were like, I predicted the Rams and the Dolphins would both draft a running back and that both Kyren Williams and Achane's ADPs would fall. And so that's why I wasn't taking Kyren and Achane in the pre-draft period. And obviously those things happened. But anyway, Olave was one of those ones that if you were reading my stuff pre-draft, you would have got on in the 3rd round. I took a ton of him. I took him in the late 2nd of almost every draft that I did in the big board, or the early 3rd even sometimes if I didn't take him in the late 2nd. He's now going like 18 or 16, but that's where he should be going. He should arguably be going directly behind Drake London. I think, if you take Olave at the 112, 201, I think you're totally justified. I mean, there's not clear names in the 2nd round. The Olave profile is strong. It is a clear name that belongs in the 2nd round. Back over to the rest of like what to expect from the Saints. The other thing that I would highlight is they had Sean Payton's longtime offensive coordinator, Pete Carmichael, for years, even after, or they've had him for years. He was there for the whole Payton time. And then you look at his coaching career. Oh, I just opened it in a new tab. keep doing that. Pete Carmichael's coaching career, he's the OC of New Orleans from 2009 all the way until 2023. So basically the entire run of Sean Payton, Drew Brees, and then even after Sean Payton, he's gone now. So they've brought in Clint Kubiak. It's going to be a little bit of a different offense. What could that mean? I mean, you could say that it might mean something different for Chris Olave. I don't think it can because they don't have depth at receiver. But it could mean different stuff for a lot of people. It could mean different stuff for Alvin Kamara, right? That's, again, I think a point in favor of Kendre Miller at the cheaper price as a guy, as the young day 2 running back going into year 2 that could potentially just be the starter, frankly, as Alvin Kamara is a little bit older. I'm just like clicking through all these ads and everything. The other thing I want to look at, is their depth chart. So yeah, you have Olave, you have Shaheed, you have A.T. Perry. They brought in like Cedric Wilson. They drafted Bub Means in the 5th round, who doesn't have a strong profile, but people are talking themselves into because they don't have a lot of depth at receiver. Equanimous St. Brown is there now. Behind Juwan Johnson, you have Foster Moreau. You have Taysom Hill at tight end. Tommy Hudson. They actually have like a little bit of a deep tight end room. Foster Moreau obviously played with Derek Carr in Vegas, or with the Raiders, I think maybe in Oakland. Taysom Hill probably factors in, but there's a lot of target volume to go around. And I agree with Hayden's point that I just mentioned, that somebody's going to be the answer underneath, and I don't know who that answer is. I don't like the Juwan Johnson bet a ton. It could be that I'm understating that because he did have a career high targets per out run last year. Maybe I need to revisit Juwan Johnson. But Foster Moreau, having that tie into Derek Carr bugs me a little. Taysom Hill's usage bugs me a little for Juwan Johnson. Maybe they bring back Michael Thomas at the end of the day. Probably the best fit for Thomas, but he may have burned that bridge and he may not play anymore. He may have burned all the bridges, may not physically be healthy enough. There's a reason he's still a free agent, certainly, whatever that reason may be. Shaheed, we talked about it a little bit on the last draft. I do want to just mention, I think he's maybe a little overpriced. We think of him as a splash guy, and he does splash, and he's going to have some usable weeks, but he doesn't draw big volume in any kind of way. Even in a passing game last year that also didn't have much. He, 75 targets, 46 catches, 719 yards. The efficiency is going to be there. The splash plays are going to be there. If you look at his game log, like, there's going to be some really ugly games. And there's going to be some usable games, which is fine for best ball. You get a 589-1 in week 1. You get a 3-153-1 in week 8. You get a 571 and 16, 365-1 in week 18, 285-1 and 6. So he's hitting on all his touchdowns are long touchdowns. And so he's adding yardage the weeks that he scores. Every week that he scores is usable. Every other week is like nothing, right? So his top 5 yardage totals are the weeks that he scored. He had one more game with 63 yards. Everything else is 40 yards or lower. And he goes like right outside the wide receiver window. He goes like 110. It's hard for me to take a guy going 110 that only had 6 games over 40 yards last year and was in a big role at age 25 in the middle of what should be his prime. He's a good deep threat. He will hit your lineup and have those spike weeks. But this profile, I want to get at week 15 or round 15, not round 11 or round 12. And there's probably some other deep threats you can get in round 15 that don't profile much different. They may not hit to the same degree, but like the Broncos guys, Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin both go quite a ways later. And I don't think they add that much different to your build than Rashid Shaheed. So I have not pulled the trigger on Shaheed a bunch. I haven't drafted him yet. I think he's kind of an indication of when wide receivers starting to thin, and the opportunity cost is higher. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. Raphael saying Rashid's going to be like Ayuk. I'll take him on that price if Ayuk's going where he's going. Ayuk is definitely an efficiency guy. This is, a unique take. I would just, I doubt that everybody is, agreeing with this specific take, but I do just want to look at it because I want to go to the yards per out run thing. It's interesting because they do both have really high ADOTs, and especially Ayuk last year, 14.3 ADOT. You see Shaheed was at a 14.6 last year. But the difference is Ayuk at this high ADOT still earned targets per route at 22.6% of routes, a really high route. It gives you this weighted targets per out run of 0.65. That's a substantially bigger number than Shaheed's 0.47 and 0.48. His targets per out run, Shaheed's last year, only 16.5% of routes that he was targeted on. This is a deep threat that only really gets hit on, certain deep looks. This is a deep threat that is like a volume earning deep threat. And it's a pretty big difference. It's a notable difference. Ayuk also a lot more efficient, although he shows a lot of yards per target type efficiency at his high ADOT. He's an efficient player. I get the comp here, depth of target and efficiency type. The thing I'm trying to emphasize is the targets per out run for Shaheed, solidly sub 20%, which is still playable. It still matters for a high ADOT efficiency player. But for Ayuk, we're talking 20+% at the high ADOTs, although these earlier career stuff, not super high, with efficiency. This stuff is, even these years when he wasn't a 10+ yards per target, this is still good. 9.8, 9.1, these are good efficiency numbers. So, I mean, I get the Shaheed positivity, and these profiles aren't as different as, your knee-jerk reaction might immediately make you think. And that's why I wanted to actually look at those profiles. The difference is that Ayuk is a guy who can actually, per route, earn 20+% of the targets. And I think potentially even more. But I have talked about Ayuk being a tricky second-round pick because he, in a breakout year, very efficient season, only had about 105 targets. And I don't know where he's going to get to 120 or 130 or 140. But I do think it's plausible for Ayuk. I don't think that's who Shaheed is in terms of, he has 109 targets through 2 seasons combined, Rashid Shaheed. Very efficient on those again, splash play type guy. That his cost, not the profile I want to be grabbing. All right, so that would be my little breakdown of the Saints. We'll keep an eye on, their prices and things that happen. Fun little change up to kind of dig into a team, why I like some of the players on that team, an opportunity to dig into Kendre Miller a little bit more. Hopefully got you guys more excited about Kendre. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drafts left. I'm going to take these as quickly as I can and get through them and then close up shop here today. The first one I clicked on is a 2-6-6-2 at this point. I've taken 4 straight running backs. So this was a 2-2-6-2 at one point. I added Jalen Wright, Kamani Vidal, Antonio Gibson, and Roshan Johnson to the build. So this is what happens to my 2-2-6-2s after I start hammering running back. Let's look at this team, see if you guys like it. It's a Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, with Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb. That was the one where I took Chubb well behind ADP. Jalen Wright, Kamani Vidal, Antonio Gibson, Roshan Johnson. It's not a great build, but I think Antonio Gibson's going to factor into it as a top 2 running back in New England. I think Roshan Johnson is going to factor into some playing time in Chicago. Wright and Kamani Vidal do provide that rookie running back upside. I wrote an article over at the Substack to hammer rookie running backs in all formats. You guys are seeing rookie running backs in all of my builds. This is an example of that, getting both Wright and Vidal in this build. Taylor is the anchor on this team. Chubb is sort of a late season play as well, not somebody to really bank on. That's where the Gibson pick came in, because I know I was looking at this going, okay, if Taylor is an anchor, Chubb, Jalen Wright, and Kamani Vidal is not any early season production. So I need somebody who's going to play a little bit of a role. And so I took a couple veterans in the last 2 rounds, Antonio Gibson and then Roshan Johnson, a second-year veteran, but another guy who I think could play snaps week 1. I need to get some early season production into this running back build. I think I hopefully did with those 2 picks. This is the kind of team where you might catch me trying to tell you that like Alexander Madison is a viable pick, which I'm not saying he would be a good pick, but Tank Bigsby's already off the board. He's probably my other favorite, pretty clear number 2 back. Elijah Mitchell is certainly an option at this stage. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is maybe an option. We are in round 17 in this build. I don't have to take another running back, but I'm a little concerned about the early season production. I mean, maybe Kamani Vidal can get into the equation early for the Chargers, but I kind of look at Chubb, Wright, and Vidal and think I might not get anything out of any of them in the first 5 weeks. So I would need Gibson and Roschon to really do some stuff. I got the 2 quarterbacks I mentioned. Let's look at receiver and see if I need to get to 8 receivers, because it's a 2-6-6-2 right now. This might wind up being a 2-7-7-2. It's Puka Nacua, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Christian Watson, Mike Williams, Xavier Legette. So it's not a deep receiver group either. Puka, Higgins, and Keenan Allen, I like the top 3. Christian Watson is not one of my favorite number 4s. It does stack with Jordan Love. Mike Williams is not a good 5, really. Xavier Legette is my 6. I mean, these are kind of behind the wide receiver window picks. A lot of times I'll have 6 receivers before Mike Williams comes off the board. Laporta and Kittle, that's why this happened. I took a really strong 2 tight end build, both Sam Laporta and George Kittle. And so these builds as well, I don't have any Minnesota players to bring back on the Green Bay. And I do have Laporta on the San Francisco stack, which is a Kittle, Purdy. I don't have a clear wide receiver play. The top wide receivers by ADP are Devontae Walker, Jalen Tolbert, DJ Chark. The top running back was Elijah Mitchell. I have not drafted Elijah Mitchell. It is 17:09. It's very late in this draft. I do think a second running back who could play a little bit early season would make sense. And I don't know that the rookie, Isaac Guerendo, would displace Elijah Mitchell as the number 2 right away. So kind of like early season, if Christian McCaffrey were to, pick up a little ding early in the year, or they just don't play him, 90% of the snaps out of the gate, they play Elijah Mitchell 30% some. And then he's also another piece on the San Francisco build, the Purdy Kittle, where if McCaffrey misses time and misses the fantasy playoffs, it pushes San Francisco towards a more pass-heavy situation. That's where the Purdy Kittle stuff can pay off. And Elijah Mitchell is potentially the guy at that point. I'm going to take Elijah Mitchell in this pick, throw him on with the other San Francisco stuff. I have the Laporta bring back. It gives me a nice little game stack in week 17. And then on the way back, I got to get another receiver into the mix, I think. I can't just go 6 receivers, but it's going to be a 2-7-7-2. I just start DJ Chark to put him in the queue. He's a guy that I like to add sort of whenever I can into these builds, because I think the Chargers are an open receiving core. We've talked about that. We did the Chargers the last time we spun the wheel. All right. That's where we go with that team. Here's a Chihuahua. Let's jump into this draft. It's a 2-4-6-2 at this point. And again, probably was a 2-2-6-2 where I added. That's exactly right. It was a 2-2-6-2, and I took Ray Davis and Kamani Vidal at the 13-14 turn. This is a draft out of the 112. That was a Garrett Wilson, Drake London out of the 112. It's Anthony Richardson, Kirk Cousins, Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, Ray Davis, Kamani Vidal, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Cooper Kupp, Zay Flowers, A.D. Mitchell, and Josh Downs. So that's the double stack one where I grabbed both of those Colts to go with Anthony Richardson, Kyle Pitts, and Dalton Schultz. I have Cousins stacked up with both London and Pitts on this one. Was even able to get him just a little bit before his ADP. I took Zamir White on this one a little bit behind ADP. He's not a pick that I've made a lot or my favorite running back in that range. It's a Zamir White, DeAndre Swift start. If I could go back, I think I would maybe redo that. I think there's a lot of fragility in both of those profiles, and I acknowledge that with Swift. Had talked about him a little bit with Kerrane. Certainly combining these two is a concern. I do think there's a lot of scenarios where Swift is an issue for your builds, but I also think he's a pretty good price. And one of the reasons I don't think he's as fragile as the market seems to think with an 83 ADP is 6.1% of his, or 6.1 million of his money in 2025 is already guaranteed. He got 14 million fully guaranteed. It's different than even like the Tony Pollard contract, who got like 10 million. And I don't even think it was 10 million fully. DeAndre Swift got $14 million fully guaranteed at signing, including the vast majority of his 2025 money. I do think he's very likely to be the starter in an offense that I think is going to be good, because I think their wide receivers are really good and all of that stuff. So still, though, some injury concerns with him in his past and some efficiency concerns. He wasn't very good last year with the Eagles. A lot of fragility at the top there. And then I've only taken Ray Davis and Kamani Vidal behind them. So at least White and Swift give me projected early season volume. And then Davis and Vidal give you the later season volume, or that's the hope. It is a 2-4-6-2. We are at the 15-16 turn. And then I'll have the 17-18 turn, and that will be it. I do need to probably get another running back here. My favorite in this, you know what? I'm going to take two more rookies here. Both Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy are here. They're both very slightly behind ADP. So now I have four straight rookie running backs behind the fragile early season volume of Zamir White and DeAndre Swift. I got to hope those guys carry me to a late season breakout for somebody or multiple out of the Ray Davis, Kamani Vidal, Bucky Irving, and Tyrone Tracy group. I just took Irving and Tracy. Really actually like the way that kind of pans out. I was talking about getting those different shapes of running back production in your zero RB builds. You need White and Swift to be good early. Maybe Ray Davis plays enough of a role early that he can factor into the early season equation. And Bucky Irving, I think, is going to play more throughout than people expect. He's a good pick at pick 180. He's one of my favorites late. All right. That's a fun running back room with all that rookie upside. The puppy, I have one of the little emojis that says this is an intriguing team for some reason or another. This is the Laporta McBride team. We've talked through a bunch. I ended up taking Curtis Samuel in the 7th round, trying to get through it. Since then, I took Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, Jerome Ford in the 12th, ahead of Marshawn Lloyd and Kendre Miller. So I did take Jerome Ford somewhere else. He's only my RB2. So I think that's why I took him over those young guys, is I wanted some early season running back production. So this team is now a 2-2-6-2. It's got Laporta and McBride, so it's great at tight end. It's got Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, stacked with Rome Odunze and Christian Kirk. The receivers are Devontae Adams, Kirk Odunze, Curtis Samuel, Tyler Lockett, Mike Williams. It's not a very good team. That's what happens when you take both Laporta and McBride in the 3rd and the 4th round. It gets thin everywhere else, and I still only have the 2 running backs. I've starred a number of running backs in my queue. What sucks also here is you get the ADP value is Cole Kmet, 11 picks past ADP, and he stacks with my QB, Caleb Williams. I already got hit with the George Kittle thing in an earlier round where the pick was a tight end. This is a draft room that is letting tight ends slide, and multiple times after taking both Laporta and McBride, I've been given an opportunity to take or been in a position where the best player available for me is pretty clearly a tight end that I can't take, which is frustrating. I think the pick's got to be a running back. Ty Chandler is the ADP pick. Ray Davis is right behind him. I think Davis is a better pick than Chandler. But I actually think Vidal fits the build best. So I'm going to take Vidal, actually, because I think he has a better chance to be the workhorse, like without injury or anything else, just by taking it over by the late season if Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins just can't do it. And Jerome Ford is sort of this early season production. Vidal, I think, is more back-weighted and has a chance to be a strong back-weighted set of production. 5 more drafts. This one is a 2-3-5-2. I believe this is the one where we took Marshawn Lloyd at the start of the stream, actually, to make it a 2-3-5-2. Brock Purdy, Tua, Jalen Warren, Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Malik Neighbors, Tank Dell, JSN, Kincaid, and Kittle. Maybe this isn't the one on this particular stream. We're up at 148. Kendre Miller went in the interim after I took Marshawn Lloyd, but Rico Dowdle, whose ADP is actually ahead of those guys, fell through. This is the spot where I only have the 3 running backs that I probably get my first share of Dowdle. 7 picks behind ADP. I could go Darnell Mooney as my wide receiver 6. I've talked favorably about the routes and the situation in Atlanta. I don't have New Orleans players for a bring back. I didn't get Kendre Miller. Oh, sorry. New Orleans doesn't play Atlanta. New Orleans plays Vegas. I don't have Washington players either. Just thinking through whether I want to go Dowdle as my RB4 or Mooney as my wide receiver 6. And I kind of think the Mooney thing is actually a bigger drop-off. Behind Mooney is Jermaine Burton, who I like, Roman Wilson, who I don't really love, just because of the Arthur Smith effect, really. I do think the opportunity is there for him. Troy Franklin, Adam Thielen, Malachi Corley, Marvin Mims. It starts to get thinner. And Mooney's a thin play as well, but I do think he's going to be out there for a lot of routes and potentially he's working off of both London and Pitts. Potentially could be the pretty clear third option in the passing game. I have Bijan on this team as well. Oh, no, I don't have Bijan on this team. Don't have any Atlanta players on this team. And so it seems from that regard a good spot to take Mooney as well. Only 5 receivers into the 13th round is going to push me that way as well. I'm going to take Darnell Mooney on this team and bypass Rico Dowdle again, because I just think there's so many opportunities with those rookie running backs and stuff later that, I mean, Dowdle's path to playing time is pretty strong, but like Vidal is going 17 picks later. I might be able to get Vidal on my next pick, and I don't think it's that much of a different equation than what Dowdle is. All right, 4 more drafts. This one is a 2-3-6-2. Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, Devon Achane, Aaron Jones, Marshawn Lloyd. 6 receivers are Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Jordan Addison, JSN, and Dontavian Wicks. The tight ends are Trey McBride and Luke Musgrave. So this is the Tua with Achane and Tyreek with an Amari bring back, and then it's a Jordan Love with Marshawn Lloyd and Luke Musgrave with a Jordan Addison bring back and an Aaron Jones bring back. This is the team I was talking about earlier. That's a Tua, Achane, Tyreek, and then the other quarterback is also heavily stacked up. I have 2 big Week 17 game stacks. I really love this build. Oh, this one also has Dontavian Wicks. So it's got Jordan Love, Marshawn Lloyd, Dontavian Wicks, Luke Musgrave, and then Jordan Addison and Aaron Jones bringing back. So this is about as big as you'll see me game stack, but all of these guys were pretty much good picks independent of the stacks, like where I took them all. Felt strong about all of them, other than maybe Wicks and Musgrave, who I pushed up a little bit to make sure I had Love stacked up. But Love was a big discount, 9-pick discount. Aaron Jones, I had already taken it at a 3-pick discount. Jordan Addison at a 1.2-pick discount, but I like taking him whenever I can. I'd taken Amari Cooper in this build because I had taken Tyreek and Achane early, but 2 picks behind ADP. It's a fun build. It's a 2-3-6-2. So really I'm looking at running back, and we are late at running back here. Tyler Algier, Chuba Hubbard, the top 2 running backs, and then Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy. Those would be the top 2 on my board. I'm going to add Bucky Irving to this one as well, and I might grab Tracy on the way back. So this was the 14-10, and then at 15-03, I might be adding both of those rookie running backs to get me up to 5 RBs. Next draft is a 2-3-6-2 at 14-11. Trevor Lawrence, Tua, Kyron, Kenneth Walker and Marshawn Lloyd, Lamb, Waddle, Christian Kirk, Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown, and Jerry Jeudy. And then Njoku and Brock Bowers. The tight end position is done. 6 good receivers. Got my QBs. It's a 3 running back build. We need to go look at running back again. And it's pretty burnout at running back. Tyrone Tracy actually already went off the board. You got Jaleel McLaughlin and J.K. Dobbins at the top. Don't really see a reason to go to a wide receiver 7 here. So I got to just make my decision at running back. I think this is a Dobbins pick. I talked through him a little bit on Stealing Bananas with Sean. He got me a little bit more into it. As late as he's going, it's just a cheap way to play into a backfield where I think there's going to be a lot of rushing. It's kind of like what you guys were talking about with Cleveland earlier. You kind of got to be in on somebody. I don't like picking a guy coming back from an Achilles, but it at least seems possible. The next draft is a 2-3-6-2, and the opportunities there is the key thing. CJ Stroud, Purdy, McCaffrey, Chase Brown, Dowdle, Nico, Waddle, Keon Coleman, Godwin, Sutton, Lockett. This is the thinner wide receiver room. Andrews and Kmet. Stroud is stacked up with Nico, Purdy, with McCaffrey. It's only 3 running backs. I do have a Rico Dowdle here. It's exact same running back group. Actually it's McLaughlin and Dobbins and Chuba Hubbard at the top of the running back queue, but Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy are both here. McCaffrey, Chase Brown, Dowdle. Pretty easy turn for me here. I'm just going to grab both Bucky Irving, making sure I'm not missing anything else, but I have my 2 QBs and my 2 tight ends that I like here. So I'm going to grab both Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy at that turn. That gets me to a solid 5 running back build of McCaffrey, Chase Brown, Dowdle, Irving, Tracy. When you have McCaffrey at the top and you take him as the 101, you don't have to be as strong at RB2. So, Irving, Tracy, Dowdle are later guys, but, with Chase Brown, I mean, that's fine. I feel good about that. All right, last draft. It's a Chihuahua. It's a 1-3-7-2 right now. I've starred Bryce Young for a late round pick. I probably added... Oh, it's a Deontay Johnson. I've lost my other QBs. I must have started several QBs here. I usually do. Brock Purdy, Kyron, Jonathan Brooks. So I have Brooks as well. So it's kind of a Carolina build. And Kendre Miller. That's why I started Bryce Young, is because I have Brooks and Deontay Johnson. But yeah, all I have at running back right now, Kyron, Jonathan Brooks, and Kendre Miller. Amon-Ra, Devontae, Flowers, Addison, Deontay. So Devontae Adams and Deontay Johnson, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, George Kittle, and Cole Kmet. I'm going to take Young ahead of ADP at some point, but not yet, because I could take him on the way back at 174. I have 7 receivers. I'm probably close to done there. I have my 2 tight ends. This is another running back pick, and I'm staring at Jaleel McLaughlin, J.K. Dobbins, Chuba Hubbard, and Bucky Irving. So it's going to be another Bucky Irving pick. And we are back to completely caught up on these drafts. A lot of good comments. I'm going to run. I'm going to leave. Throw those comments in the chat if you want to. I want to go hit a workout right now. Appreciate you guys hanging out. It's been fun. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Later.